Tēnā koutou, nā kai mahima, nā mihi nui kia koutou. So today's story is a bit of a sort of story of serendipity, really, because when we started looking at ePortfolios for the University of Waikato, I was looking around for a quick and simple way to gauge sort of ease of use in a rough sort of thumbnail sketch kind of way. I didn't want to make up my own questions because I thought, well, who knows whether they're valid or reliable or all those nasty things that statisticians keep quoting at us. And so I thought, well, maybe there's something out there. So good old Google came to the fore and I found something. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. I'll also share the scores for 3 different ePortfolio tools, a couple of versions of Mahara, a Canadian product called Chalk and Wire that Lynn Bai uses at the University of Auckland in the pharmacy school, and Google Sites that some of our early childhood people used. So towards the end we'll do a bit of a comparison. But I've also got a paper copy of the survey itself with the scoring mechanism on the back. If you want the Word file for that, then just leave me your card at the end of today and I'll flick you over the Word file that's made of. Don't worry about taking notes for this because there's a bit.ly link at the end of it. So all you need to do is record the bit.ly link. So all you have to do now is listen or adjust your Facebook settings or whatever it is that you're going to do. So this SUS thing actually goes back quite a long way. I don't know how many of you have been around computing as long as Gordon and I have. But in the days of VT100 green screen terminals, which some of us will remember, this guy, John Brooke, was working for Digital Equipment Corporation in the UK. This was in the George Orwellian year of 1984. And this System Usability Scale was something he developed to assess usability on green screen VT100 terminal applications. Now, one of the nice things about this particular system is that it's proven reliable across all kinds of things. So although he started off using it with this 1980s technology, you could use these questions for something like a mobile app or a piece of software or a new piece of hardware, let's say a tablet. So it can be used in a whole variety of situations. Now that leads us to the question, what is usability? And for that I've got a quote from Terry Pratchett's Discworld novel, Moving Pictures. Unfortunately, Terry died recently. It's a very sad moment for science fiction fans across the world. But usability is not a quality that exists in any real or absolute sense. Perhaps it can be best summed up as being a general quality of appropriateness to a purpose of any particular artifact. So appropriateness to a purpose. And this notion is neatly summed up by Terry Pratchett in his novel Moving Pictures. And I'll just read the quote out of the book. Well, at least he keeps himself fit, said the Arch-Chancellor nastily, not like the rest of you fellows. I went into the uncommon room this morning and it was full of chaps snoring. That would be the senior masters, said the bursar. I would say they are supremely fit. Fit? The Dean looks like a man who's swallowed a bed. Ah, but master, said the bursar, smiling indulgently. The word fit, as I understand it, means appropriate to a purpose. And I would say that the body of the Dean is supremely appropriate to the purpose of sitting around, not moving very far, and eating very large meals. The Dean permitted himself a little smile. So usability is not a sort of an absolute. Subjective measures of usability are usually obtained through the use of things like questionnaires and attitude scales. And examples exist of general attitude scales which are not specific to any particular system. And the SUS scale is one of these. So one of the things I discovered, which led me to use it, is that for quite a lot of usability scale questionnaire type stuff, you've actually got to have a fairly large population to sample in order to get a decent sort of reliable result. But the SUS scale has proved to have reasonably good reliable results from as small a sample as 8 to 12, or even as few as 6. So what that means is that you can have a really small group that respond to this and still get a reasonable kind of rule of thumb sort of idea of what the usability level for an item is. And the idea of the SUS scale is for new users, not experienced users. So the idea is that people will come in and use something like Mahara for the first time. At the end of the semester or the term or whenever they're using it, they'll fill out the scale and it's their kind of first experience of the particular item. But also note that it's not intended to be diagnostic. It is a real rough sort of rule of thumb calculation. It won't tell you details like what should we do to improve the interface. You know, is there some navigation that could be done better? It won't do that for you. And it uses some fairly predictable things. For example, it uses the good old standard 5-point Likert scale, which everybody knows and loves. One of the other things about SUS is the idea is that people do it reasonably quickly because it's only 10 questions and people are supposed to really blat through it. It's not like, ponder, reflect, ponder some more. Maybe that, no, maybe not. So it's not like that. It's just tick, 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 which is nice from the lecturer classroom point of view because it means you can do it really easily. When I administered this to several of the groups at University of Waikato, they did it as a Google form. So it was all on Google and it was just collated for me and whack, that was it. Okay, so we're at the crunch point really, which is what are the questions? So here's the first 5. Okay, so what do you notice about these questions? Yep, they're very general. So they can be applied to obviously sort of hardware systems or software systems or mobile apps. Yep, that's a good point. Thanks, Jeremy. Any other ideas? Yeah, they're quite personal. It's all about I. You know, I think this, I think that. So you're getting the perception of the user. That's what you're getting from it. Do you notice also the pattern? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. What's the pattern? I think I found. Right. So the first one is I like. The second one is unnecessarily complex. The third one is easy to use. The fourth one is I need some technical support. So there's a plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus pattern to the questions. Alrighty. So just while you're thinking about those questions, I'll just get my beautiful assistant to hand out the... So you can see it's real easy. 10 questions, Likert scales, quick to use, quick to administer, in something like a Google form, automatically collated for you, not a big burden on anybody. Small sample sizes, so even if you had a class of 10, you could get a reasonable result from it. All of those things made it very attractive from my point of view, but also that it's been used for over 25 years nearly now, and it's benchmarked internationally. So when you look at the scores for SUS, you're actually looking at something which has got sort of an international credibility. And as well as that, dear old Debt Corporation said, in terms of copyright, all you have to do is acknowledge us, and that's it. You can use it. You don't have to pay heaps of money, just use it. So scoring, it takes a little bit of work to get your head around, but because you had that pattern of plus minus, plus minus, plus minus for the questions, for the odd items, you subtract 1. So if the user puts 3, for example, for question number 1, then the actual score is 3 minus 1. Yeah? And for the even number items, subtract the response from 5. So for 2, if the user put 5, then it would be 0, I think. There's 3 kinds of people in this world. 3 kinds. Those who can do maths, those who can't. So the scoring bit is actually the hard bit, but obviously you whack up a Google spreadsheet to do that and then just plug in the numbers. And so what happens then is you get a range of values from 0 to 100 instead of 0 to 40. So what you've got at the end when you've multiplied your raw score by 2.5 is a score out of 100. But SUS scores are not a percentage, all right? So don't think of them. The temptation, because they're out of 100, is to think of them as, like 50% as a pass or something. But they're not like that. They actually are a little bit more sort of, the weightings are not as even as a 0 to 100 percentage type scale. And so what has happened is that some other people, in this case people with the delightful names of Bangor, Kortum and Miller, have done a bit of correlation between the SUS score and some adjectives. And that's what I use because I find the score on its own doesn't tell people a lot. So if you look at the mean of a particular score band, the bands are in the brackets, then they've correlated these with some adjective descriptors. And so that's what I use when I look at a particular item, because what I find is that saying, okay, it got 63, what does that mean exactly? Particularly because you'll notice the bands are not even. In the research that these folks did, they found that the ranges were actually skewed for some of the descriptors. So for me, I use this as a kind of my way of reporting back to people, because people understand that, yeah? I guess from about 46 down, Heath. I mean, something in worst imaginable, like if you did our an assessment of our land desk help software at the University of Waikato, I think pretty much in that range.
I guess it was just as good enough.
Yeah. It is, I mean, for me, I'd expect something to be at least in this kind of level. And I've got some comments to make about that a bit later on. It's a good point. Because really, you can implement anything if you want to. It's just that as you go down this range of scores, the lower down you get, the more scaffolding you're going to have to create, aren't you? If you've got something down here and you think, oh, we're going to implement it anyway, which is what happens at universities sometimes, then you've got to think about how much scaffolding you're going to provide. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples. There are a couple of older examples of older versions of Mahara here, which came out in the 50 to 60 kind of band, which according to Bangor and Kortum is sort of the okay, fair sort of area. But when the early childhood people did their Google Sites evaluation, it came out in the same kind of band, 50 to 60. And then my friend Lynn Bai at Auckland University, who are using a Canadian ePortfolio product called Chalk and Wire, did this survey with her students, came out in the middle of the 50 to 60 band. So you can see a pattern there. I tried to persuade someone I met at the Mahara Hui over in Australia from Perth to do this with Pebble Pad, so I had a Pebble Pad score to go with it, but unfortunately that sort of fell by the wayside. But for these 3 products, two of which are specifically ePortfolio design products, you can see they all fall in this kind of middle band, which, thinking about Sam's keynote earlier this morning, makes sense in terms of her description of the kind of initial learning curve for students. Like, it's not super easy, but it's not so hard that people just kind of drop out like flies. It's somewhere in the middle. And so this usability scale supports that notion that Mahara is not super easy to use, but it's not so hard to use that people simply get burnt off trying to sort it for themselves. So there's some comments here from students, because as well as this, because I was collecting stuff for in-house, I decided to put in a comments box, which is not part of the original survey, but I'll just give you a minute to read some of those comments. Some of them are a bit sort of backhanded positive, like this one. And why would you use it for an essay anyway? But anyway. And then some of the other comments. Okay, so a bit of a mixed bag, which fits again. For me, that was a good correlation with the placement of the student evaluation scores, that it was somewhere in the middle. Some really were enthusiastic, some were not so enthusiastic, so there's a bit of a mixture there. So in terms of, I did a quick little analysis, it wasn't very scientific, about positive, neutral, and negative comments, and then other comments. Often when you give students feedback, they use the opportunity to bag the lecturer, the subject, the assignment. You know, there's other things there which they just get a chance to vent over. And so you just let that go and say, yes, fine. But so what we had, in fact, was a fairly consistent sort of pattern. Again, this, I think, supports the whole middle of the road rating, where you have 11 comments that I recorded as negative, 11 recorded as positive, 7 as more neutral, it's okay, but, and then 7 which were not on the topic at all. So once again, that sort of correlates with the particular ratings people gave. And I've got my own theory about this, that there are several factors that affect the SUS score, particularly in relation to ePortfolio software. My guess is that other products such as Pebble Pad would also score in that 50 to 60 band, because I think we've got here a level of complexity that when you get something that's super easy, like, you know, there's one button to click, you click the button, it does what you want, the rating goes up. Because the functionality level is very simple, it's very low. But when you've got things like an ePortfolio package, then the functionality is quite diverse, and obviously it has to be more complicated. So you have navigation issues and where to find things. So as a result, some of these other things kick in, like user interface design, navigation design. Other things that kick in include the digital literacy level of the users. If this is not super easy to use, then if people are digital residents rather than digital visitors, they'll probably actually have the nous to solve it for themselves. And if they're very confident, as opposed to not very confident, that will also contribute to it. And these are some of the items that I've used to make this references for the presentation. And this, I used underscore, which may be a mistake. But anyway, the item between each of the spaces for the bit.ly address is underscore, so don't just use spaces. So this is a public document. You can simply use that bit.ly address to go to it if you want to. You're most welcome to use it. If you decide that you want to use the SUS and you want to use this as an introduction of some sort, you're most welcome to just take this and use it straight off the patch, or modify it if you want. Okay, that's about me, I think.